They cut down my tree, so I made sure they never enjoyed their backyard again. And the wild part is, I never raised my voice once, not even when I saw what they did. You ever come home and feel like something's wrong before you even see it? Like the air's off, too quiet, like your house is holding its breath? Yeah, that was me pulling into my driveway that afternoon. I had just gotten back from visiting my sister upstate. 2 days, that's it. Nothing dramatic. I left everything exactly the way it always was, including this massive sugar maple that had been sitting in the back corner of my yard since before I even bought the place. That tree wasn't just landscaping. It was the reason my backyard worked. Summer afternoons, it cast this perfect shade over my patio, cooled the whole area down by at least 10 degrees, and in the fall, man, the leaves turned this deep, burnt orange, like something out of a postcard, and they'd blanket the grass so thick you could barely see green underneath. It felt like stability, like something permanent in a world where everything else kept changing. Now, about 3 months before all this, the house behind mine sold. Young couple, late 30s maybe, the kind of people who show up with matching SUVs and a 5-year renovation plan before they even unpack a box. I remember the first weekend, trucks, contractors, power tools going from sunrise to sunset, like they were trying to turn that place into a magazine spread overnight. Fresh white paint, oversized sliding glass doors, built-in outdoor speakers, and then came the deck. Not just a deck, a raised wooden platform, big enough to host a small wedding, elevated just enough to give them a clear view straight into my yard. I didn't love that part, obviously, but hey, people renovate. That's life. I figured we'd work it out like normal neighbors. Except, normal neighbors don't erase a 40-year-old tree while you're out of town. I parked the car, stepped out, and right away something felt wrong. Too much light hitting the patio. No shade, no movement, no rustling leaves, just empty space. I walked toward the back fence slowly, like my brain was trying to delay what my eyes were about to confirm, and then I saw it. Gone. Completely gone. All that was left was this wide, flat stump sitting there like a gravestone, sawdust still scattered around it like it had happened hours ago. I just stood there for a second, not even angry yet, just confused, like maybe I missed something. Maybe there was some explanation that would make this make sense. Then I looked up, and there he was, standing on that brand new deck like a king surveying his land. Arms crossed, slight smile, like he was proud of what he'd done. I walked up to the fence calm, way calmer than I felt, and I asked him, "Hey, what happened to my tree?" And this guy, I swear, didn't hesitate. Not even a second. He just shrugs and goes. It was blocking our sunset view. Just like that. Like he was talking about trimming a hedge, not cutting down something that had been growing longer than he'd probably been alive. I told him, still calm, that tree was on my property. The trunk's clearly on my side of the fence. He nods, like he already knew that, and says, "Yeah, but the branches were hanging over our deck area. We're allowed to deal with that." Deal with that. That's the phrase that stuck with me. Not sorry, not a misunderstanding, just entitlement wrapped in a legal-sounding excuse. Now, I could have escalated right there, could have called the cops, filed a report, turned it into a full-blown neighborhood war, but I didn't. And that's the part people don't always understand when they hear this story. I wasn't being passive, I was being patient. Because when someone shows you exactly how they think, what they value, what they're willing to justify, you don't interrupt them, you let them finish the thought. So I just nodded, said, "All right," and walked back inside. No yelling, no threats, nothing. And I could feel him watching me, probably expecting some kind of reaction, maybe even hoping for it, because people like that, they're ready for conflict they can see coming. What they're not ready for is silence. That night, I sat out on what used to be a shaded patio, now completely exposed, and I just looked at that empty corner where the tree used to stand. And that's when it hit me, it wasn't just about the tree. It was about control. He didn't like that something on my property affected his view, so he removed it. Simple as that. No conversation, no agreement, just action. And I remember thinking, okay, if that's the game we're playing, I can play too. The next morning, I made a call. Not to the police, not to a lawyer, not yet. I called an arborist. A real one, licensed, the kind of guy who walks your property like he's reading a story written in the soil. He came out that afternoon, took one look at the stump, and just shook his head. "Healthy tree," he said. "Mature, easily worth more than most people think. Then he crouched down, started examining the ground, the slope behind the fence line, the way the land dipped just slightly toward the neighbor's new deck. And then he said something that changed everything. He goes, "You know, this tree wasn't just giving you shade." I asked him what he meant. He pointed up the hill behind both our properties, all that rainwater from up there. This root system was absorbing a huge amount of it. Without it, he pauses, looks toward their deck. That water's got to go somewhere. And right there, I didn't say anything, but in my head, everything clicked into place. Because suddenly, this wasn't about revenge in the loud, obvious sense. It was about physics, about gravity, about letting nature do exactly what it's always done, just without the one thing that used to hold it back. And the best part? I wouldn't have to break a single rule to make it happen. Now let me pause the story for a second, because this is where things get interesting, not emotionally, but structurally, legally, strategically. Because what that guy did, it wasn't just rude, it was one of those gray area moves people think they understand, but usually don't. According to standard procedure in most U.S. residential zoning setups. And yeah, this applies whether you're in a strict HOA or just a regular suburban block. You can trim branches that extend over your property line. But here's the catch. You can't damage or destroy the health of the tree itself. Cutting it down entirely? That's a whole different level. That crosses into property damage, sometimes even timber trespass, which in some states can cost you triple the value of the tree. And mature trees? Those can be worth tens of thousands of dollars. Easy. From a legal perspective, he gambled, and he gambled wrong. But here's the twist. Lawsuits take time, money, and energy. And honestly, that's what people like him expect. A loud reaction, a legal threat, something they can push against. But this, what I was about to do, this wasn't confrontation, this was alignment. And psychologically, this is where it gets even better. This is a psychological trap people fall into all the time. They assume control over something visible, like a view, or a structure, or a space, but they completely ignore the invisible system supporting it. Drainage, soil stability, root networks, the quiet stuff that doesn't argue back until it does. He thought removing the tree gave him more control over his environment, but in reality, he removed the one thing that was protecting it. And the moment I understood that, I stopped thinking like a neighbor and started thinking like gravity. So the following week, I didn't rush. I didn't act emotional. I acted precise. I called a landscaping company, not the cheap kind, not the mow your lawn and call it a day crew. I'm talking about a design-focused team, the kind that builds outdoor spaces that look like they belong in architectural magazines. I told them I wanted something aesthetic, clean, high-end, something that would elevate my backyard. And that part was true. I just didn't mention the second function. They showed up early Monday morning, 3 trucks, a small excavator, a crew that moved like they'd done this 100 times before. And of course, like clockwork, my neighbors came out within 10 minutes. You could feel it, curiosity mixed with that subtle territorial energy, like they were trying to figure out if whatever I was building was going to affect them. I waved, casual, friendly, the same way I had before they cut my tree down. No tension, no attitude, and I could see it confused them a little. The foreman and I walked the yard, and I pointed to the exact corner where the maple used to stand. I want a dry creek bed running through here, I told him. Something natural looking, like it's always been part of the land. He nodded immediately. He got it. These guys always do. And then we got to work. They started by digging a shallow trench, curving slightly along the natural slope of the land. Not straight, not obvious, just enough to look organic. Then came the layers, gravel base, drainage fabric, then smooth river stones on top, dark mulch lining the edges, ornamental grasses placed just right so it looked like a design choice, not an engineered solution. But underneath, that's where the real work was happening. Hidden beneath those stones was a subtle drainage channel, angled just enough to guide water along the natural runoff line. And here's the important part. It never crossed the property line. Not even an inch. Everything stayed completely, legally, on my side. But gravity doesn't care about property lines. Water follows the path of least resistance, and the lowest point near that fence? That brand new deck. Now the first few days, nothing happened. Clear skies, dry ground. Everything looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. The creek bed sat there like a decorative feature, blending into the yard so well you'd think it had always been there. My neighbors? They relaxed. I could see it in the way they used their deck again, drinks in hand, music playing through those outdoor speakers, feet up like they'd won something. And I just waited, because I knew something they didn't. Eventually, the weather always changes. About a week later, the forecast rolled in. Heavy rain overnight. Not a drizzle, not a light shower. I'm talking about one of those slow, steady storms that soaks everything, the kind that doesn't look dramatic, but does the most damage. That night, I slept just fine. Next morning, I woke up early, earlier than usual, and stepped outside with a cup of coffee. And right away, I could hear it. Not loud, not chaotic, just the quiet, consistent sound of water moving. I walked over to the yard, and there it was. The hill behind both our properties had done exactly what it always does. It released all that rainwater downward. But this time, there were no maple roots to absorb it, no natural system slowing it down. The flow was stronger, faster, more focused. And my little decorative creek bed? It guided that water perfectly. Smooth, controlled, almost elegant, like it was supposed to be there. It ran along the edge of my yard, exactly where the natural runoff line wanted to go. And then, right where the ground dipped near the fence, it pooled. On their side, right beneath the outer edge of that deck. Now at first, it didn't look like much. Just damp soil, a little soft underfoot. But if you understand ground saturation, you know, that's just the beginning. Because once water starts collecting in one spot, it doesn't just disappear, it lingers. It seeps. It weakens. And over the next few days, that's exactly what happened. The sun came out, but the ground under their deck didn't dry. Not fully. Not evenly. That lower section stayed dark, heavy, unstable. Then came the second storm. This one hit harder, shorter, but more intense. Heavy bursts of rain that overwhelmed the ground faster than it could recover. And this time, the effects showed up immediately. I was out back again the next morning, same coffee, same routine, when I noticed it. One of the corner posts of their deck, just slightly off. Not dramatic, not collapsed, just shifted. Enough that if you looked closely, you'd see it wasn't sitting perfectly straight anymore. And then I heard it. That subtle creak when someone steps on wood that's no longer fully supported. Later that day, they had people over. I could hear the music, the laughter, but there was a difference now. Movement slowed near that side. People hesitated. One guy stepped down onto the lower stair and immediately pulled his foot back like he'd stepped into something he didn't expect. Because the ground there? It wasn't solid anymore. It was mud. Thick, wet, stubborn mud that doesn't care how expensive your deck is. Days passed, and it got worse. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough, every single time it rained. The outdoor rug they'd laid out, permanently damp. The bottom step? Sank just a little more, maybe half an inch. Not enough to trigger a repair crew, but enough to feel wrong every time you stepped on it. And that's the thing about slow problems, they're harder to fight. There's no single moment you can point to, no clear this is when it broke. It just degrades. Quietly. Persistently. About a week after the second storm, there was a knock on my door. I already knew who it was. I opened it, and there he stood. Same guy, same house, same deck behind him, but the expression? Completely different. No smile this time. No confidence. Just this tight, controlled frustration, like he was trying to stay polite because he wasn't entirely sure what he could accuse me of. He goes, "Hey, quick question, have you done something with your yard? Like, changed the drainage or something?" And I just looked at him for a second. Not aggressive, not defensive, just neutral. Then I said, "Yeah, I added a creek bed. Helps manage runoff." He nodded slowly, eyes flicking toward the fence line, toward that exact corner where everything was happening. "Well, ever since that went in, we've been getting a lot more water near our deck." And there it was. The implication. Not an accusation. Not yet, but close. So I kept it simple. Calm. Factual. I said, "That's interesting, because before, that maple tree used to absorb a lot of that water. You know, the one that got cut down." Silence. Not long. Just a second or two, but enough. Enough for the connection to land. Enough for him to realize this wasn't random. He shifted his weight a little, glanced back again, then said, "Okay, so, what do we do to fix it?" And that question, that was the moment everything came full circle. Because now, for the first time, he wasn't talking about his deck or his view. He was asking about a problem that existed because of something he did. So I gave him the simplest answer I had. No idea how you fix it on your side, I said, but on mine? It was working fine before. He frowned, clearly not liking where this was going. Yeah, but there's got to be something, right? I nodded. There is. And I let that hang for just a second. Not for drama, not to be theatrical, just enough to make sure he was listening. Replace the tree. He blinked. What? A mature one, I said, same size, same spot. The roots will stabilize the soil and absorb the runoff again. That's what was handling it before. And now you could see it. The realization, not just of the cost, which, trust me, wasn't small, but of the chain reaction. One decision, leading to another, leading right back to him. He didn't argue, didn't push back, just stood there for a second, processing, then gave a short nod. All right, I'll look into it. And just like that, he walked away. No apology, no acknowledgement, just consequence. And me? I closed the door, walked back to my patio, still a little too sunny without that maple, took a sip of my coffee, and for the first time since all this started, I smiled. Not because I won, but because the system corrected itself. So here's the part nobody tells you when they hear a story like this. They think it's about revenge. Clean, satisfying, almost cinematic. Bad neighbor does something selfish. Good neighbor outsmarts them. Balance restored. And yeah, on the surface, sure, it plays that way. But if you zoom out a little, if you really look at what happened here, it's not about getting even. It's about understanding systems most people ignore until it's too late. Because the truth is, I didn't do anything to him. I didn't cross the fence. I didn't damage his property. I didn't even raise my voice. All I did was stop compensating for a problem he created. That tree? It wasn't just part of my yard. It was part of a shared environmental balance between both properties. And the moment he removed it for a better sunset view, he didn't just change his view, he changed the way water moved through the land. And that's something a lot of people miss, especially in suburban setups, HOA communities, or anywhere property lines create this illusion of independence. You think, this is my side, that's your side. Like everything stops at the fence, but it doesn't. Water doesn't stop. Soil doesn't stop. Root systems don't stop. The lesson here is, ownership doesn't mean isolation. You can control what you build, what you remove, what you change, but you can't control the ripple effects once those changes interact with the environment around you. And that's where people get into trouble. Not because they're evil, but because they're short-sighted. Now from a social perspective, and this is something I've seen over and over again, situations like this rarely start with, I want to hurt my neighbor. They start with something way simpler, entitlement mixed with convenience. He didn't like the tree because it blocked his view. Fixing that the right way, talking to me, maybe negotiating, maybe offering to split the cost of trimming or repositioning. That takes effort, humility, and patience. Cutting it down while I'm gone. That's fast. That's easy. That's control. But here's the psychological catch. When you choose the easy version of control, you usually ignore the complexity behind it. That's what I meant earlier when I said, this is a psychological trap. People focus on the visible outcome they want and ignore the invisible systems holding that outcome together. He saw the tree as an obstacle. He didn't see it as infrastructure. And once it was gone, the system didn't disappear. It just rebalanced itself in a way that no longer benefited him. Now, could I have sued him? Yeah, probably. From a legal perspective, I had a strong case. Mature tree, clear property line, no permission, that's textbook. But lawsuits are loud. They drag on. They turn neighbors into enemies for years. What I chose instead was quiet accountability. I let reality do the arguing. And that's something I think more people could learn from, not just in neighbor disputes, but in life in general. Not every conflict needs escalation. Not every wrong needs to be answered with force. Sometimes, the smartest move is to step back and ask, what happens if I just stop holding this together? Because a lot of situations, jobs, relationships, even communities, are being held up by one side doing more than their share. And the moment that effort disappears, everything reveals itself. Now, I'm not saying you should go out and engineer revenge or manipulate situations. That's not the point. The point is awareness. Understanding that every system, natural, social, legal, has consequences built into it. You don't have to create those consequences, you just have to recognize them. And if someone ignores that, eventually, they run into it. Now here's the part I'll leave you with, because I'm genuinely curious what you think. If you were in my position, you come home, your tree is gone, your neighbor shrugs it off like it's nothing. What would you have done? Would you go straight to legal action? Would you confront them head on? Or would you do exactly what I did? Stay quiet, understand the system, and let things play out? Because there's no perfect answer here. There's just different kinds of consequences. Anyway, if you made it this far, I appreciate you listening. And if you enjoy stories like this, the ones where it's not just drama, but a little strategy, a little psychology underneath, go ahead and hit like, maybe subscribe, and stick around. You never really know what people will do until you see what they think they can get away with.